Then, yeah, once again, welcome everybody to this talk. On today's talk, I want to share with you some ideas how you can scale your Angular applications, especially those ones who working in at enterprise level, if you have to deal with lots and lots of entities and creating lots of views out of it. And what I found out in my recent project was that there is not really a concept how to scale up different views, especially if you only have CRUD operations. So we tend to duplicate our code base more and more and more, and which leads into maintenance problems later on. And that's why I was looking for a solution for this problem. And I met a very tough software architect working at SAP Ariba. His name is Frank Kolar, and he's working on a framework called metaUI. And metaUI has a long history. It's older than 12 years. And you might be asking, okay, Angular is not 12 years old, so why can this framework be 12 years old? So metaUI origins from Java, and they used this solution to build enterprise applications in the Java environment. And Frank does the job to transport this technique to Angular so that we can use it. And today's talk will be an introduction about the feature set and the idea behind metaUI. And we will also see some code. But I can also confess already that we are not able to cover each and every single feature because it's a huge platform that you can possibly use. So yeah, then let's start. Before we go more into detail, you can have a look on the right side of the slide. You see a very simple form, and when I would give you the task to turn this into code, you can start thinking of, okay, how would I implement this as fast as possible? And the first very basic approach would be literally to generate different components that can be used to inserting some values, to have a select box, to have some radio groups. And often if you start with it, it looks something like this, right? So you have a single control, and the single control has to deal with the form control state. So you want to display a value, or you want to display a field error or errors. And then you have to do some styling and so on. And then you end up writing this piece of code here. So over 10 lines of code, maybe. So this is fine. It also works. If we have a look at the whole form for a very single use case, you see that we produce a lots of code and we duplicate ourselves more and more and more. And as I said before, this is just a very simple use case. So I know of projects having more than 30 or 40 fields in one form. And if there is a requirement change, it's kind of hard to wire up everything correctly so that it works fine. So yeah, so if you then scroll your template down a bit, it might be something familiar with you if you are knowing Star Wars movies. So it's like the intro, the intro video there. So yeah, just so for the record, so if you have 15 form fields, you produce around 100 lines of code without abstraction, of course. And in this very easy use case, you have not covered I18N, for example. What if you need to translate all the placeholders, all the labels in your form? And what is about this? What if you have a role concept going on so that specific user roles only are allowed to edit or see certain fields? How do you handle that? With ngIf, ng switch case? So hopefully not. And then you have also sometimes a requirement dealing with dynamic layouts. So you want to switch the layout based on the role concept, or sometimes you have different regions using your application. So someone comes from Austria or the USA or from Germany, and those workers have different views they use to do their all-day job, but it's the same component behind it. So if you add those capabilities to your applications and those requirements, it can be, you can imagine that it becomes a little bit hard to do everything of that. And yet another thing, so if you deal with 10 models, or we call it domain objects in metaUI, and you just need to create 3 pages for each of those domain objects, then you have around 30 pages you have to write and maintain. And this makes already 3,000 lines of code, and you have not achieved very much, right? And this is really the point where teams need to scale, because you need more and more people to work on certain pages and maintain those pages. And what metaUI really wants to do for you is to reduce the amount of maintenance work and to reduce the amount of code you need to write. So yeah, I was already introduced, but this slide is also here, so I quickly go through it. So I am Gregor. I work as a software architect at a startup based in Karlsruhe. It's called CoIT. And if you have any questions concerning the slides or these presentations, or in general about Angular, so then you can reach out to me via email or Twitter. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to the metaUI stuff that I can share now with you. So metaUI kicks in when you have to deal with a lot of domain objects. So what is metaUI? So the basic idea is that you have your domain object written in TypeScript, and metaUI provides some metadata on top of that, being able to create the whole application for you. It's not only about forms, it's really about deriving the whole application from your domain object. And for that, metaUI provides a set of APIs and components that helps you to achieve that goal. So, and the cool thing is that you do not really have to write any template to do this. And how this is done, we will cover just in a moment, where I'm very excited about it. So you have a look at the right side of this application. So this application, for example, is fully written with metaUI and Angular. And there is not a single line of code describing how the components are laid out and how they are composed to each other. Everything is about rules and configuring the view for you. Yeah, and here is a promise that metaUI makes. And as far as I can tell, it's pretty close to this promise. So metaUI really wants to reduce the amount of code that you have to write by 70%. So 70%, it's a huge number. And what you see on the right side is basically the template that you need to write to derive your whole application from. So you have a component called mContext. So M is a prefix of metaUI. So this component comes from metaUI. And then you can specify some data, some configuration parameters, and then the whole application is rendered on the fly for you. So yeah, so here you have the comparison view. So on the left side is the classic approach, and on the right side there is the metaUI approach. So yeah, this is a quote. You can read it on your own. This quote is made by Craig Federighi, and if I'm not mistaken, Craig Federighi is the inventor of metaUI for the Java world, or the architect who have written this. So, okay, how does metaUI achieve this goal of reducing a huge amount of, reducing the lines of code you have to write? So it introduces a new concept, and this concept is called object style sheet. And object style sheet helps you to create rules for your domain object and tell the rule engine of metaUI how the domain object should be rendered on the screen. And you might be already familiar with this concept because we have something similar to it. And this is called SAS or SCSS or less. So these are the style sheets that we already write to make our apps beautiful. And we can nest rules into each other in SCSS to scope our rule set a little bit better. And exactly the same thing applies to OSS. So the idea of OSS really derives from SAS in this case. Yeah, so the features of metaUI, just very briefly described, is it follows the try principle. So it does not want that you need to repeat yourself. It is highly customizable. So it has nothing to do with this generic approach. So it's not about generic, it's about configuration and composition. And metaUI is also a UI library. So you will see in the demo that we are using material design or Angular material to set up our views, and metaUI provides bindings already for you that you can work with Angular material to build your application. And you can also write your own rules to bring in your own custom framework that you have built in your enterprise, maybe. But material is supported out of the box, for example. Yeah, and to have the thing a little bit more clearer, I want to go with you a little bit into code. And first, I want to show you the app that I have chosen that we can work with. So it is a little Star Wars application. On the left side, we have a list view with Jedis and Sith. And we can have a view on the right side displaying a picture of the Jedi, and we can also edit it, and we can also have a create and edit view for it. And I want not to go too far into detail. So basically, this is a functionality, but what I am interested in is how this is done or coded right now. So, and you can see here on the left side, I have an Angular application already open. And here you see all the components that I need to just achieve such a little feature set. So I have a form component. So WebStorm takes a while for opening this file. Oh. Okay. The first time that I see a loading indicator in WebStorm. So hopefully, okay, so at least we see some code. So it's nothing special about it. It's really just a material form, and we have this for creating or updating a Jedi. We have a detail view, for example, and we have also the list view component. And the thing is, between the create and the view and the update form or view, they all share the same things. They need to have access to the object, they need to know about the domain model, and they need to know about how to render information. So there are three components, but they all derive from the domain object. And what we now want to achieve is to reduce the code duplication, because each of those components really needs to implement some service calls, and we want to get rid of those things. We just want to have one component or one rule set that looks at the domain model and sees the context. Oh, you want a Jedi displayed as read-only? Okay, take this view. Oh, you want to edit a Jedi? Okay, then take this view, for example. But this should all be done dynamically for us. So the basic idea in metaUI is having an entity and combine it with a rule. So the entity is what you all already know, because it's just TypeScript. And in metaUI, we need that you implement an interface to it. And it also needs to be a class. It's also needed to work with metaUI. And you see that the interface that you need to provide really just tells the rule engine something about your entity. So there is a class name as a string, and this is just about because JavaScript runs really low on introspection. And that's why we need some basic data so that we can understand how the properties of the entities are structured. And you see that a little bit clearer in this one certain method called getTypes. So if your entity has a property that needs to be rendered, for example, an ID, and the ID is of type string, then we require you to write a method getTypes. And therefore, for ID, we need the class token or the instance of string. And we can use this type information, put it into the rule engine of metaUI. And if metaUI sees, oh, okay, there is a string, I know I can use an input field for that, or I can use a text area or a datetime picker for it. So this is the idea of that. And the rule looks something like this. You can specify a rule like you would do in SCSS. You can write a rule for a class. And in this case, this is a class character. And then you can define, all right, so if you have the field ID and you want to render it on the view, just annotate this in the view with a label, and the label has the value ID, for example. So this is the most basic rule that you can possibly write in metaUI. And yeah, so here you can see the connection. The entity has this property ID, and if you want to do something with the ID and you want to show it in the view, then you need to provide the rule for it and write a field declaration inside of your rule. All right, so, and this is the top level process. You need to register the entity and the rule in the rule processor of metaUI, and metaUI will finally create the application for you. The rule processor knows about every type that is registered, and that's why the rule processor also knows how the types needs to be rendered. And this does not only work for primitive types like string, number, Boolean, and so on. It also knows if you provide a rule for your character entity that we have discussed before, and the rule processor sees how, oh, there needs to be a character rendered, then the rule processor exactly knows how to render it. And if you're asking how this really looks like in the code, so then here is the first example. metaUI comes with a basic component called mContext. And mContext really represents the rule layer of metaUI. So mContext knows how to render specific fields. And you bootstrap the whole rendering process by passing an entity to it. So the actual instance of the class containing all the values. And with that, you will render all the fields and all the application. And there are also other fields and parameters, for example, an operation or a layout. So you can set an entity into a certain context, like I want to create something, I want to delete, view something. And so this context helps our metaUI to generate specific views for your need. And there's also a third one that we unfortunately cannot cover today, but there's also a concept of layouts. So you can dynamically switch between various layouts for your entity. So sometimes you need your character maybe just as a card, then you have a card layout, then you have a list view, then you have a list layout, and sometimes you have a master detail thing going on, then you can automatically just pass this master detail layout to it. So this is already baked into metaUI. And what this is not shown here in the slide, but you can also pass a role to it. So you can work with user roles already and can say, okay, when the user has a role manager, then show a few more fields than just a normal user would see. If you want to start with metaUI, then you can run a schematic. It's called add ngx -metaui/rules, and this will ask you several questions, what framework you want to use, and so on. And then it will install all the dependencies needed, and it will also scaffold the project structure for you to write rules and to consume that and pass them automatically to metaUI. In the app module, you will see something like this. You have a metaUI rules module that bootstraps all the services for you. And here is the second line in this metaUI rules. There is a material rules module. And the material rules module comes from metaUI itself, and it provides all the bindings to add Angular material. But you can exchange these bindings with your own if you want to. So it's really just to get you started very quickly. All right, so let's have a look how this is look like. So I want to check out another version of the application where we did a little bit of refactoring already. So it's okay. The CLI complains a bit because I deleted some files sometimes. So hopefully it will start very quick. And what I want to show you here is when you have installed metaUI, you will get a folder called rules. And inside of this rules folder, you have those object style sheets where you can write all the information how an entity should be rendered. And you see a few or various instructions here. This one here with the field equals ID is that one that we have seen in the slides, pretty easy. And you see also some advanced techniques here. You can see that if you have some kind of in a URL that represents an image, you can say, okay, please use an image component to display those URL to have the image view. And you can also set some bindings to it so that you have an input binding with a URL, and then you pass this avatar URL right into this image component. And you can also specify an alt tag, alternative tag, to have a label for it as well. And you see that metaUI introduces a whole concept on a whole language concept. So $value is a special value, and it really refers to the avatar URL value. And you can also access other properties of the entity by writing object.firstName to compute values also on the fly. And what you also can do is, you can see this here on the top, there's also a field definition, but it has an @ sign before. So add means that you can create your own new properties on the fly on top of your entity. So if you need a computed property, you can totally do that this with metaUI as well. And there's also something confusing here called traits, but we will come to this in just a minute. Yeah, and if we have a look at the views, you see all the views are still there like before. So I did not manage to get rid of all the components yet. But I was able to reduce all the form code, and I just used this mContext context component from metaUI, passing in a character instance, and I set the operation to view because I just want to view some data. And this is basically it. And I just load all the character information using a simple service. So in this case, it's just a mock service. So I will give you the URL to the repository later on, so you can play with it on your own. Yeah, I just want to show you that each and every component, if WebStorm let me doing so, really looks very similar now. So each component just has this context component in it, and it has an additional button. But beside that, everything is really the same. So what I have achieved by creating this certain rule, I am really able to write the same code everywhere. So, and if this happens, it's pretty obvious that we can refactor this code even more. And we will have a look into this in just a moment. But for now, for the moment, I want to, just want to repeat some information about what OSS can do for you. And I am pretty sure that I haven't even found out about every single feature in the metaUI OSS rule set yet. So this is really just introductional stuff. So let's see again. So if you can create a field, you can say, all right, for this field, you want to render a specific label. You can link your own components to visualize fields. And you can also provide the bindings to those components if you want to. So this is pretty straightforward. And maybe if you are familiar with other form libraries like ngX Formly, you have a similar configuration, or a similar type of configuration where you can bring in your own components and your own bindings. So this is pretty similar. Then you can create your own fields, just having an @ sign before the field. So you can create own fields, computed properties on the fly. And then you can really go on and do your own stuff with the template engine of metaUI, or the rule engine of metaUI. And then there's something called a trait. So we have seen this just before in the code. And a trait is pretty similar to what you will know from SCSS, that is a mixin. So for really complex configurations of a field, you can just extract them in smaller rule sets, and then you can reuse them in other rules. So for example, in this full name, I really want to specify that the full name is derived. So derived means in metaUI that this is a read-only field. So it will never produce an input component for it. It will also always just display the value. And with the other trait, heading 1, I just specify that I want to wrap the value inside of a h1 tag. And these traits are also already prepared for you and transported to you coming from the metaUI framework. On the right side, you see the rule for heading 1. So there is another label that you can use. You can wrap certain components into other components, and metaUI had a generic container component. And if you want just to display the value as a h1 tag, you can use this generic container component and instruct the wrapper component to use the tag h1 to display the value. So you now can see that you can nest components very, very easily into each other by using this wrapper component concept. It's also very useful if you have to do with accordion components, for example. There you have a content area and then this display toggle height, toggle visibility area. And you could do this with the wrapper component, for example. Yeah, so you can write those traits also fully on your own. Everything is fully customizable in metaUI. And to create a new trait, you just also use this @ sign, like we have already known from the field. Yeah, and it's really pretty much the same concept like you have seen in SCSS or SAS. All right, so now let's have a look at the second refactoring. So I see the CLI has been started, and Before we go to the second refactoring, I want to show you what I have achieved so far. So yeah, this is still working. So the application is still working with metaUI. And I've also derived the edit formula from the OSS rule set. And I was also able to have this select box here. And this is also an interesting concept, which you already know now. And I scroll a little bit down in this rule set, and you can see if I want to specify the lightsaber color of a Jedi or a Sith, that I have some options. It can be blue, green, red, violet, or it has no color. And if you want to do this as a select box, metaUI provides you a trait for it, saying, okay, please render this as a select. And this select can have different choices. And behind the trait, you now know there is no very magic going on there anymore, because behind this as select trait, you have something like this. It just wraps, okay, there is a select component somewhere, and please bind those choices to the select component. So this is a very powerful concept to have very lightweight rules here. All right, so let's go on and have a look at the third and last refactoring step. So hopefully, okay. So here it is, and just unfold it, okay. So now in the view section before, we had 3 components. So for create, edit, and view something. And now I only have this character view component. So I was able to collapse everything down into one component. You see the M context as before, and you see that I pass the operation to this component. You remember, this is the context which allows us telling metaUI, okay, maybe you should render the entity a little bit differently here. And this operation can be used like the following. So you can instruct metaUI to behave differently in different contexts. So for example, you have this class character and you define an operation view on it. So then you have something called zones. So zones are just places where you can render components on the left side, on the right side, on the top, on the bottom, or you do not want to render them at all, then it's the zone none. And if you want to rewrite the rendering order of those properties, the first that you want to do is to clean up your zone entirely. And that's why you write something like zone none goes to star, because then every field is in zone none. And then you can just display with those arrow syntax, excuse me, which fields you want to display. And as you can see here, so, okay, the view operation really just displays the full name and the avatar URL. So let's check this very quick. So this is the view, and it's just the full name and the avatar URL. In the operation edit, I did something very special here. I wanted to create a title for this view, and that's why I just said, okay, then add field title. I want to have this as heading 1, and then the value is edit. And then I just went on and say, okay, when I edit something, I want to be able to edit those fields here. Let's check this out, the edit view. You can see there is a heading that I have created on the fly with my rule set. And here you can also see the whole formula for editing something. So, and now I can pass Obi-Wan Kenobi a red lightsaber. So I'm pretty sure you would not like that, but okay, it's possible. And for the create view, it's really the same thing. So I can create another This time a Sith Lord, and we can pass him a violet lightsaber, and he was in the Battle of Geonosis. And when I click save, I broke the application. Okay. So it seems like that I have a little bug right here. So, but okay. So normally it would just apply here to the list, but I will check the error later on and will push the fix to GitHub a little bit later. Yeah, but you definitely see the idea, right? So you have full control about your entity and how it's rendered. So, okay, so this was just there as a summary. Here you can see the operation view and how it's done. One more time. The real critical thing here is that you need to know that you first need to add all fields to this zone none, and then you can go on and override the positions of the properties. So yeah, and now awaiting the third refactoring. So we have covered a lot of ground already, I think, today. So you have seen how you can, how metaUI handles OSS files to create rules for an application. And there is much more that we can do with metaUI. And maybe we can cover this in a second talk to metaUI a little bit later on. So I just want to show you what is also possible. So you can see here in the character view component, I have this mContext over here, but below I have still this form button. And so I just cheated here a little bit, right? And it's totally possible to do those interactions also completely with metaUI. There is a concept called actions allowing you to specify buttons or other components, and that you can bind to events and so on to derive the whole application from your entity. Then there's also another thing. I still use a component called character list. So character list is this component here on the left side. And I still use the basic or classic Angular approach to do this. This is also totally possible by using metaUI. So here we would need another concept that we haven't learned yet. It's about layouts. And you can specify a card list layout and pass this also just to the mContext component, and the list would be displayed fully automatically to you. Okay. One last bit that I want to share with you is maybe to get rid of the thing, what is this, how get the operations into the mContext component. So this is a pretty basic thing that I did here. I have created a convention, a naming convention for my roots. And whenever I see an operation in the URL like edit or create, I pass the respective operation to this mContext component. So you can see this here in the Star Wars routing module. You can see here that I have a root, I have this create operation, and then a root with this edit operation, and then I have the root with no operation. And if I do not find any supported operation here, I just fall back to the view operation. So this is the current very simple rule how I automatically derive those operations and pass them to the mContext component. So since metaUI is really a big thing and a big topic, and for me, honestly, it also needs to rethink a lot and how you structure your entities and your UI logic at all. Because we cannot cover everything in a single talk, Frank and me are hosting a YouTube channel called metaUI TV. So if you are interested in learning how to create Angular applications with metaUI, how you can get started, and also want to know about the advanced topics, I highly recommend that you check out our YouTube channel. And we try to set up a process right now to deliver a video at least every 2 weeks, to have a study content there. If you want to just have a look into what we have covered today and how the project looks like in deep, you can just have a look at my GitHub repository. It's called metaUI Playground, and there everything should be right there for you. And as I said, I definitely will get rid of this bug that we have found together. And afterwards, everything should be work fine. And if you want to have a look or review the slides of this talk, I've already uploaded them to speakerdeck.com. And there you can find also every information that you need about this topic. Okay, then I thank you very much. And if you want to have a look at the docs of metaUI, we also have a website, www.metaui.io. So if you want, you can check this out as well. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, so just go ahead.